When my father and mother married in 1933, following the deaths of both of their previous spouses, my mother brought 5 children to the marriage, and my father had no children. Interesting to note, my mother and father had a family honeymoon. They loaded up a new car, which belonged to my mother when she married my father, and took the family to the World's Fair in Chicago. They did stop in Iowa to leave my sister Wanda Sue, who was 2 years old, with my Aunt Faith. Wanda Sue stayed, and the Iowa cousins became part of the honeymoon. After my mother and father married, 4 more children were born. I am the youngest of 9 children and the only one of my mother's children to be born in a hospital. All my siblings have passed away. My parents were Naomi and Eugene Dorman. When they married, they combined their already thriving farming operations and land holdings. My mother and her first husband, Jim Smith, owned and operated an apple evaporating business in Bethel Grove. This business was vitally important to the local economy of the region during the Depression years. Apple growers in the area had a market for their apples, and local people found work. Important to note, at that time, the Apple Evaporating Company held a lucrative contract with the U.S. government to supply dried apples to the armed services. After my parents married, the Smith Evaporating Company became the Dorman Smith Evaporating Company, but then, after a few years, it closed. My father and mother continued to grow apples as well as grapes, strawberries, and peaches. I remember thinking when I was old enough to sit in one of our peach trees and eat peaches that everyone must have a peach orchard where they could go to eat peaches. In the summer, there were always farmhands about. I remember vividly all the work to harvest crops because I was part of it. I picked strawberries and I cut grapes as well. And I'm sure I spent a great deal of time running up and down the rows of strawberries and in and around the grapevines. My goal for my day's work at the strawberry patch was to make enough money to buy a big cold RC Cola and a candy bar at the Bethel Grove Country Store. The store was located between the place where our home was and the place where my parents grew the strawberries. My parents owned the country store, and they rented it to Richard and Henrietta Davis, who operated it. There was great preparation to get ready for harvest. Strawberry crates were tacked together, strawberry quarts and grape baskets were procured, handles had to be attached to the grape baskets, and labels were pasted to the lids. Field hands had to be contacted and secured. We had one full-time hard hand who worked year-round and made his home in the house that had belonged to my mother and her first husband. His name was Jess Jordan. And sometimes people who worked for my parents lived for a time in the house that had belonged to my father and his first wife. In the work to secure hands for the harvest, of particular interest were the Cherokee from northeast Oklahoma, who my father brought over for the strawberry harvest in the back of his big truck that had sideboards. He built cabins for them down by the Spring Branch on the place where the strawberries were grown. They camped there during the strawberry harvest, and then he would take them home to Oklahoma. My father's work during the strawberry harvest included serving as secretary-treasurer of the Farmington Fruit and Berry Association. During the strawberry season, the association would have a refrigerated car parked on a railroad spur of the Frisco Railroad on the west side of Fayetteville. This site is now the site of many big apartment complexes. Strawberry farmers in the area would bring their crates of berries and load them into the car for delivery to markets all over the United States. Farmers relied on a guaranteed market and a fair price for their berries. Daddy's work involved keeping a ledger of the commerce related to the Strawberry Association. I remember the big adding machine he used. I remember playing on the conveyor that carried the crates of strawberries into the refrigerated car. His work took him late into the evening, therefore I did not get to go with him very often. When the Strawberry Association closed sometime in the early 50s, I think, my father had suggested that monies held by the association be donated to local cemeteries. The beautiful rock retaining wall on the south side of the Farmington Cemetery was built with the funds donated to the Farmington Cemetery by the Farmington Fruit and Berry Association when it closed. Work for me in the winter included bringing in the wood. We relied on wood stoves for heating and cooking. I had to get this chore done before my radio programs came on. I always listened to The Shadow, Bobby Benson and the B-Bar B-Boys, and the Lone Ranger. This chore changed when the natural gas line came down our road. Having the availability of natural gas to heat a broiler house prompted my parents to build a chicken house in which to grow chickens for Tysons. Soon after the building of the chicken house, we converted to gas in our home for heating. Then my wood hauling chores ceased, but another chore took its place. I had to feed the chickens. It was in the late 1940s and early 50s. Times were changing. Producing, gathering, and marketing fruit had to change. My parents were diversified in their farming. They also had a small herd of dairy cattle. They sold milk to the pet milk company. My job was to carry water from a hydrant in the backyard to a large wooden barrel in the front yard. The milk was strained into a large milk can and kept cool in the barrel of cool well water until the milkman from the pet milk company could pick it up. We had well water that was pumped by a gasoline-powered engine into a water tower, and there was plumbing in our house. There was a hydrant in the backyard and one at the horse trough, but not one in the front yard, so I had to carry the water. I also rode the combine that was used to harvest the oats that would later be ground to feed the milk cows. My job was to tie the sacks of oats and kick them off the combine into the field. I did this as a teenager after my brother Herbert went to the Navy. David Warren, my sibling just 2 years older than me, had passed away when he was 2, just before I was born, the fall of 1940. So Herbert Eugene was 4 years older than me, and he was my closest sibling, and I did indeed feel the closest to him. I didn't mind the work on the combine. My father was always patient with me when I fouled up. He would stop the tractor to take care of a particular problem occurring on my end of the operation, and then get back on his tractor and proceed on. My family in my girlhood home included my grandmother, Ella Arkansas Cohey Dorman. She was born 2 years after the end of the Civil War. She possessed a treasure trove of history about this area and her late husband's English ancestry. She was born in the Illinois Chapel community and later lived and raised her own family in Walnut Grove. She was a constant in my life and a great help to all of us. I still remember the stories she told and her excellent homemade egg noodles. She taught me to crochet. I have a beautiful crocheted tablecloth that she made for me. She passed away in 1959. My girlhood home was a beautiful 2-story house designed and built by my father. There was a time after my brother Herbert went to the Navy that I had a choice of 3 bedrooms upstairs. I would move from one to the other, as one bedroom was always more desirable depending on the season. There was a storeroom upstairs and housed past relics and memorabilia of my parents, and even relics from their first spouses. I spent many long hours going back into the past as I carefully examined all that was stored there. There were 2 bedrooms downstairs, a nice big bedroom in the front part of the house for my grandmother Dorman, and then my parents' bedroom toward the back. The house had only 1 bathroom, which was downstairs. The bathroom always had a bathtub. A lavatory and toilet were added the fall of 1947 after my father's surgery for colon cancer at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. We had a front porch and a screened-in back porch. There was a room in the front of the house close to Grandmother Dorman's room that held a large desk that had belonged to my grandfather, Herbert Warren Dorman. The desk had been built in the 19th century at Cane Hill. He had used it to house his law books when he served as Justice of the Peace in Walnut Grove. There was also a piano. We called this room the piano room. We had a large living room with a built-in bookcase and a window seat all along the west wall. Our country kitchen included built-in cabinets and a dining area on one side. The dining area had built-in china cabinets. When I was growing up in Bethel Grove, there were two churches in our community, the Little Elm Missionary Baptist Church and the Bethel Grove Cumberland Presbyterian Church. My family belonged to the Presbyterian Church. The churches were located 1 mile apart. Our church was situated across a country lane from the Bethel Grove schoolhouse. This lane led to the Ralph Ruby home and the Ruby Spring. The Ruby Spring was used by both churches for baptisms. As I recall, vacation Bible schools were sometimes jointly sponsored by both the Baptist Church and the Presbyterian Church and were held in the school building. Our churches also combined to put on a Christmas program at the schoolhouse. There would be recitations by the children and a Christmas play practiced and performed. There was a wonderful stage in that school, complete with wings. We gathered as a community to decorate a very large cedar tree. The tree had been cut down and erected in the front corner of a large schoolroom that had been turned into an auditorium. Christmas goodie bags were prepared to hand out to every child in the community and would be handed out by Santa Claus at this community Christmas tree. The names of all the children in the community were attached to the bags, so if some children could not attend, the bags were delivered to them. Christmas carols were sung by all in attendance and prayers were offered. Then on Christmas morning at home after Santa Claus came, my family would open their presents. Christmas in Bethel Grove in those years was an enchanting time. I also remember the wonderful times we had at play. After church and Sunday dinner, friends would come to play. Often they just came home with me after church for Sunday dinner. We played ante over. What fun! In this game there were two teams, one on each side of a building that served as a barrier. A player on one team that starts with the ball throws the ball over the roof to the other team, yelling some version of ante over to warn them that it had been thrown. If the other team fails to catch the ball before it hits the ground, then they will yell ante over and throw it back. However, if the team that is thrown to catches the ball, then the player holding the ball runs around the building and tries to hit one of the members of the opposing team with the ball. Players are safe if they succeed in running around the building without being hit. If a player is hit, then they join the team of the player who hit them with the ball. Gameplay continues until one team has all the players or there's just one left. The game can be adapted. Children learn and practice adaptations in their play. We played this at home and at school. Favorite indoor games at home included Monopoly, Chinese checkers, and pick-up sticks. My favorite game was Authors. In that game, we learned the notable authors of the world and some of their works. We had a ping pong set, and our large dining room table was quickly turned into a ping pong table. The ping pong balls would be flying all over the kitchen. During the summer, we swam in the Illinois River. The river was just 2 miles west of our home, and the swimming hole was below the big steel bridge that spanned the river. After I learned to swim and drive a car, and before I had a driver's license, Mother would let me take the car and drive to the swimming hole. I usually stopped for my neighborhood friend, Jeannie Doms. We felt really grown up going swimming by ourselves. For us at the time, it was a big adventure. Other neighborhood playmates included Willie Mae Stapleton, Mary Lee Davis, and Ellen Shores. Playing hopscotch, jumping rope, and playing jacks were favorite activities played on the cement walk in front of our house. Mother ordered Archie funny books for me to be delivered by the rural mail carrier. I loved these, and later she ordered the magazine 16 for me. I loved to read movie magazines as well. There was no shortage of reading materials in my house. We had National Geographic magazine and the Reader's Digest, and my parents subscribed to the Northwest Arkansas Times that was delivered a day late by the rural mail carrier. In elementary school, some games I remember were Drop the Handkerchief, London Bridge is Falling Down, Red Rover, and Crack the Whip. I didn't like Crack the Whip. I'm thankful for the opportunities I had growing up in Bethel Grove. I learned to work and play. I felt safe and loved. I now live on the north half of the 40 acres on which I was born. I look at the same horizons and enjoy the glorious sunsets that my mother did. Someone asked me the other day if I still lived in the same place, and I said yes. I don't know how to live anywhere else. I feel that the values of rural community life were carried into the Farmington community as a whole when the rural schools consolidated with Farmington School, and that the kids today in that school benefit from those inherited values. My public school education began in 1946 when I started to school at Bethel Grove. A picture of grades 1 through 5 of the Bethel Grove School in 1946 depicts 23 students. I can name some of the school children in that picture. Mary Lee Davis and I were in the first grade. Willie Mae Stapleton, Ellen Shores, and Jeannie Doms were in the second grade. Wanda Lee Stapleton and Gail Ruby were in the fourth grade. Herbert Dorman and Harold Clayton would have been in the fifth grade. As I recall, the following year, 1947-48, only grades 1 through 3 remained at the Bethel Grove School, while the other grades went to school at Farmington. I then went to second grade at Bethel Grove. Lena Bell Beckett was my teacher. The 1948-49 school year saw the Bethel Grove School completely closed, and I began school at Farmington in the third grade. That same school year, my father set out to get the required enumeration for the Farmington School District to save the school from consolidation with Fayetteville. Farmington schools had been informed by the state that unless they could come up with the required enumeration, they would have to consolidate with Fayetteville. Through my father's work going house to house throughout the Farmington School District, the required enumeration was met. His work took him not only in the city of Farmington, but also the rural communities of Bethel Grove, Highland, White Rock, Savoy, and Walnut Grove, whose schools recently consolidated with Farmington. All through this process, there was much talk in my home about the progress of the work and great rejoicing when the required enumeration to keep the school was met and certified. However, again in the late 60s and early 70s, Farmington school consolidation came up again, this time due to financial problems and some sentiment in the community that favored consolidation. And again, members of my family, along with many others in the community, sought to solve the financial problems and worked in favor of keeping the school. Once again, the school remained. It is now one of the best schools of its size in the state, with a newly completed high school complex that opened for the 2017-18 school year. There were 179 in the graduating class in 2017. At Farmington High School. When I graduated from Farmington High in 1958, there were 7. I have fond memories of my school days. I loved school, I loved my friends, and for the most part, applied myself well to my studies. I have no doubt that I was a better student in elementary school than in junior high and high school. Teenage social life and basketball became my focus. My basketball coach, Leon Beatty, remarked to me one day, "Dorman, you are well coordinated. You just don't coordinate fast enough." However, when I was a sophomore, I was on the main string of the senior high basketball team. I remember I was very involved in the life of Farmington High School. I fit in and encouraged others to fit in and be involved as well. My teachers were terrific. Hazel Penn was my favorite. Her son Ernie is the mayor of Farmington and the president of the local bank. My love, respect, and admiration for Mrs. Penn is now easily transferred to her son Ernie. When 29 years of age, I enrolled in the University of Arkansas. At that time, I had a family which included my late husband, Jim DeVault, and 2 daughters, Lisa and Donna. I graduated first in 1973 with the Bachelor of Science in Education, and then again in 1983 with a master's degree in education. My master's work included an emphasis in reading, which qualified me for an Arkansas State K-12 Reading Specialist certificate. My teaching career started in third grade at Greenland Schools, and then I transferred to Prairie Grove, where I taught second, third, and fourth grades, and worked also as a reading specialist until I retired in 2003. I loved learning and I loved school. I'm lucky for the opportunities I had in this regard, and I'm also lucky to have been born into a family that loved me, cared for me, and taught me to work. And I still love to learn and be involved in life, my family, and the world in which I live.